Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. As someone who has a PhD in Star Wars lore, I oftentimes roll my eyes when a new actor joins the franchise and then says it's like a lifelong dream for them to be in Star Wars. More like a lifelong dream to get a Star Wars merch deal, cha-ching. The reality is Star Wars is not exactly accepted in the acting community as an example of excellence, whether it's the soapy and clunky dialogue in the original trilogy, or the lack of acting direction in the prequels from George Lucas, or the soulless blockbusters that make up the sequels. Star Wars has never really been accepted in the elite inner circles of the film world. I mean, sometimes you get a little too jaded, I guess, when you look too closely at something, you forget about the important things, like enjoyment, entertainment. Now that's exactly what Star Wars is, but we know what most actors want is the approval of their peers and the Academy. They want to star in some avant-garde indie film that really explores their own inner struggle and blah blah blah. So what I really appreciate are the odd actors and actresses and famous people who actually cut through all that nonsense and are quite honest about who they are as people. I mean, just because your job entitles you to pretend and lie about who you are on a daily basis doesn't mean you still should act like that in normal life.
Matt Damon.
And so today I want to take a look at 5 actors and actresses who actually admit that they didn't really want to be in Star Wars in one way or another and then join Star Wars. I appreciate the honesty. When the original Star Wars movie came out, George Lucas hired a bunch of stage and theater actors from the UK to fill out all of the various supporting roles in the movie. Back then, no one really knew how big Star Wars was going to be, and it turned out to be pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you were a named character in the original Star Wars film, you probably eventually got your own action figure, maybe an appearance in a novel or comics. Even some of the unnamed characters later had stories written about them. Now, Dennis Lawson would play the famous X-Wing pilot Wedge Antilles, who had a larger supporting role in the film. He was designated as Red 2 in Red Squadron, and basically one of the only survivors of the Battle of Yavin other than Luke Skywalker. Now, Wedge would enjoy a pretty interesting career afterwards thanks to a number of legend stories and comics that would follow the original trilogy. He would continue to serve the New Republic in the Disney era, and then there were talks about bringing him back for the sequel trilogy. Unfortunately, Dennis Lawson, being a serious actor, said the role of Wedge Antilles bored him, and that he would only return if they gave him a larger role than just a small cameo. That was in 2014. Now, to be fair, Dennis Lawson only had a few lines in the original films, but at the same time, it's probably his most recognized role, aside from a few appearances on the BBC and some other not-so-well-known movies. Now, after The Force Awakens came out, another report came out saying that Dennis Lawson actually was just busy with other work. That's why he turned down the role of being in The Force Awakens. I don't really believe him, though, because his filmography seems a bit light around the time The Force Awakens was being made, which would be around the summer of 2014. But ultimately, the actor would change his mind, and not only would he appear in the last sequel film, Rise of Skywalker, his appearance was limited to a short cameo. The exact thing he said would bore him.
Nice flying, Lando.
Maybe they should have gotten fake Wedge to play old Wedge instead. One last interesting piece of trivia, Dennis Lawson is actually Ewan McGregor, aka young Kenobi's grandmother. Uncle. Bill Burr is the spirit animal of an entire generation of men trying to figure out what the hell went wrong in the last few decades and why does everyone hate us now. He's a national treasure, and he's a great example of gingers who are contributing positively to society. Seeing him in The Mandalorian was a huge surprise, not only because Burr mainly is a comedian and only occasionally portrays criminals in TV and films, but it's also because he's constantly talked crap about Star Wars and how absurd it is and how much he doesn't like it. You see, Bill Burr was a kid when Star Wars came out. He was the right age to really get soaked into that universe, but he missed the first film. He did see all of the films later, and he called the series a cheesy self-help book put in outer space with Muppets. I mean, the comedian does mention that it was more for kids, and he probably was too old when he saw the movie for the first time at the age of 27. Burr also claims that he only likes Empire Strikes Back, and that's because Han, not Han Solo, gets his arm cut off by Darth Vader. One could call Bill Burr a cynical, angry, and unhappy man. But that's actually how most entertainers and actors are like. It's just very few of them actually show us that side of them, except for comedians. Thankfully, Burr's one of the few people out there who's actually honest enough to say what's on his mind. It's also hilarious that he would then become Miggs Mayfeld, which is basically what I imagine would have happened if he shoved Bill Burr into the Star Wars galaxy. He's not even acting really, he's just being himself, and honestly, he's probably the most interesting supporting character in the entire Mandalorian series so far. So how did Bill get the job? Well, he ran into showrunner Jon Favreau, who asked the comedian if he wanted to join the show. Bill Burr, again with the honesty, tells Jon Favreau about how he basically makes fun of Star Wars on a daily basis, and it's probably not a good idea for him to join the franchise now. But Favreau responds that Bill Burr's fans might get a kick out of it if Bill Burr appears on a show that he says he doesn't like, which is exactly what happened. Jon Favreau is a genius. And apparently Bill Burr really enjoyed shooting The Mandalorian ultimately because it reminded him of a spaghetti western. All I gotta say is thank the Force for Bill Burr. I'm really glad he's in the show, and that last performance he gave to us as Mayfeld was just legendary. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Billie Lord's work, she also happens to be the daughter of Carrie Fisher, aka Princess General Senator Leia. Billie Lord actually originally auditioned for the role of Rey, but wasn't able to beat out Daisy Ridley, so J.J. Abrams would give Billie a smaller role as a resistance officer who occasionally helps her mom kill some fascist space Nazis. Although she was more than willing to partake in this new sequel trilogy, she wasn't always a huge fan of the Star Wars films. She actually wrote in an essay for Time that she, quote, grew up with 3 parents, a mom, a dad, and Princess Leia. She would go on to say that she didn't really like Princess Leia and saw her as kind of a stepmom who would just replace her actual mom. She also didn't understand why people loved Leia so much and why they dressed like her. As a child, Billie just wanted her real mom, the one who, quote, lived on Earth and was not from Tatooine. Now, obviously, these feelings could have been rooted in the fact that she was a child and maybe she had some jealousy, or maybe she had some bad parenting. Could be both. Billie Lord wouldn't actually see an entire Star Wars film all the way through until she was 9 or 10 because apparently the movie was too loud and always would scare her when it was on. But as she grew older and she saw how much of an impact Princess Leia had on fans, especially female fans, she grew to appreciate the character. Now, Harrison Ford owes a lot to Star Wars. He's not the best actor in the world, but what he does have is a massive amount of charisma, and Han Solo was basically the perfect role for him to play, and without Han Solo, maybe there's no Indiana Jones or Rick Deckard either. Even how Harrison Ford got the job was kind of a fluke. I mean, at the time George Lucas was casting for the film, Harrison Ford was just a carpenter, and he was working for a casting director, and George Lucas just happened to be in the room and recognized the actor who had played a minor role in his previous movie, American Graffiti. Now, Harrison Ford, like a lot of the actors in the original trilogy, had his fair share of complaints about how the first movie was produced. George Lucas is not really known as a great collaborator or actor's director. The man clearly is a genius, but he doesn't seem to do a good job sharing his vision. Harrison Ford said that he believed Han Solo was a relatively thin character, and then it would have been interesting to see him struggle a bit. The actor famously also said that he wanted Han Solo to die in Return of the Jedi. That's why you get that weird scene before the Battle of Endor where he says that he has a strange feeling he won't see the Millennium Falcon again. Ultimately, he couldn't talk George Lucas into killing off Han Solo. But he would eventually return in Episode 7, get paid massive amounts of money, and finally get the meaningful Han Solo death that he wanted. And it was a pretty epic death, but unfortunately Rian Johnson kind of forgot that they were making the trilogy, and the impact of that death was wasted. Now, Anthony Daniels is well known for not getting along with his co-star Kenny Baker, aka the guy inside the R2-D2 robot suit. But what's probably lesser known about him is his attitude towards being C-3PO. Anthony Daniels is another serious actor who saw his career differently. He definitely wasn't a fan of science fiction when the first Star Wars film came out. He'd actually walked out of a screening of 2001: A Space Odyssey and asked for a refund. Daniels was originally worried that the role of C-3PO was beneath him, and to be fair, science fiction wasn't exactly the same thing it was today. But after seeing Ralph McQuarrie's awesome concept art for the character, Daniels signed on. To make matters worse though, the C-3PO suit was incredibly difficult to get on. It originally took over 2 hours to assemble this 19-piece suit. Fortunately, by the time Episode 7 came out, technical advances made things much easier, and now it only takes a few seconds for Daniels to become C-3PO. So there you have it, guys. Those are 5 individuals who were honest enough to tell us how they thought about joining one of the most powerful movie franchises in the world, basically. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.